Let me know, John. Yeah. All right, welcome. Hello, everybody. We are streaming live, and so it's always getting that cue. My name is Reed Corbett. I'm the Executive Director here at the Coastal Studies Institute. Thank you for coming this evening, even with the impending weather. I was telling John it's sort of interesting that the weather might have kept people from coming, and we're dealing with a talk on weather and climate. So anyway, thank you for making it here this evening. We appreciate it, and we're very happy to welcome Dr. Kathie Dello out to the Outer Banks and to the Coastal Studies Institute to give us a presentation on some of the work that she is doing and doing for the state and beyond that. I'll give you a little introduction to Kathie, and then I'll sort of introduce you to some other things that are happening here at the Coastal Studies Institute. And so Dr. Kathie Dello is our state climatologist here in North Carolina and director of the North Carolina State Climate Office, which is the second largest state climate office in the nation. Appointed in 2019, I believe, just before COVID. Everything is in relation to COVID. And whether it matters or not, I don't know. I think it is significant. First woman in the position in North Carolina as well.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yes, hopefully not the last.
Kathie also serves as a co-director for a NOAA program, NOAA being the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, on climate adaptation partnership program called the Carolinas Collaborative on Climate, Health, and Equity. And this group is committed to understanding our changing climate and addressing the impacts to adjust in a just and equitable way. Kathie served as one of the lead authors. Together we served as lead authors for the 2020 North Carolina Climate Science Report and members of the Climate Advisory Panel. Kathie received her PhD in Environmental Sciences from Oregon State University and a Master's in Geography, Bachelor's in Atmospheric Science from the State University of New York at Albany. So again, very happy to welcome Kathie. I'm not going to bring her out just yet because I wanted to tell you about a few other things that are happening here at CSI. The Science on the Sound is a seminar series that we try to provide monthly, and we do have one scheduled for next month on October 19th. Allison Ropp, who is a PhD student in our Integrated Coastal Sciences program, and she'll talk about Wrecked on Chickamaucomico, an examination of the shipwrecks along Wimble Shoals, Rodanthe. And so look for that. One way to make sure that you get all of the announcements is to sign up over here for our newsletter and other announcements that we send out. That way you won't miss anything. On October 27th, so the end of next month, we have another event. There are flyers on that table as well. It's an event called From Tide to Table, where we're collaborating with several people across the Outer Banks for an oyster testing and pairing that with some other things. It's an adult venue, so we are pairing that with wines and other things. So come out and learn a little bit about oyster aquaculture in the state of North Carolina. Hear from from the Coastal Federation, who are leading some of the efforts related to growing oysters and expanding the oyster industry here in North Carolina. Hear from some of the farmers that are bringing some of the oysters to our tables, and hear from some of the scientists that are studying that. And so that's on October 27th. With that, I am again happy to welcome Kathie to CSI and to present this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, George and Reed, for the invitation. Thank you for coming out, even though there is a potential tropical cyclone happening. When we talked about this back in January, George said, oh, you can come out for the weekend and be at the beach in September. So I don't think that's going to happen, but as a weather nut, I'm excited anyway. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do at the State Climate Office. On the way out here, I called my brother. It's his birthday, and he said, I don't know what you do at work. And I probably should have sent him the YouTube link. It wouldn't be a great way to spend his birthday, but I'm not going to give you a full science story, but just dabble in a few things, let you know what we're up to, and let you know that we're available. So I titled this It's Hot, Y'all, because we did this heat mapping project in 2021 in Raleigh and Durham. And it was funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they sent us materials for our launch day and said, promote it on social media. And here's the hashtag you will use. hashtag Raleigh and Durham heat mapping 2021. That's all of our characters. So we got together and came up with something else that was a little more punchy, and we decided to go with It's Hot, Y'all. But a lot of what we do at the State Climate Office is, one, try to come up with ways to communicate science in a way that's understandable and relatable, but also we're doing a lot of decision support for people. That means we're not making decisions for folks, but we're providing data in ways that people can access in user-friendly formats. And really what we do from day to day varies because there's always an end user in mind. I don't walk into the office and say, today we are going to study hurricanes, but rather somebody from the Department of Transportation will come to us and say, we're worried about future flooding. Can we work on a study together? Or we're working really closely with Health and Human Services and the Office of Resiliency and Recovery on some heat-related work as well. So it goes in the other direction that science normally goes. There's somebody at the end of it at all times. So that means I talk to doctors, I talk to farmers, teachers, lots of teachers call. I talk to fathers who put down a very expensive deposit for their daughter's wedding a year from now. I mean, really, truly, climate and weather touches everything and everyone, but I'll jump in. I like to show this meme, and this was a meme before memes were things, but this was Raleigh in 2014. This is about 2 inches of snow. Everything on here is real except for the Michelin Man. So it's just chaos. And whenever Raleigh has any sort of, if today we got our tropical storm warning pop up for here, any mention of ice, we all just stay home immediately because we don't want to be in this mess. And this, to me, coming from the north, was funny because this wouldn't happen in Buffalo, New York. But it also just puts into context place really matters in all of this. And place in North Carolina really matters. I think if a tropical storm warning had popped up in Raleigh, everyone would have stayed home. So we're thinking through climate resilience and framing things for people based on where they are. And sometimes within the same area, it's not the same. So you will have communities that have very wealthy people living next to very poor people, and who wins in the climate resilience space, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what we're facing here in North Carolina, and this comes from the report that we worked on, is that there are big future changes in store if we continue to use fossil fuels as our energy source. The we in that is the entire planet. North Carolina is part of a planet, but unfortunately, the atmosphere doesn't know boundaries. We will see temperatures outside of our historical envelope. This summer was really brutal, and it might be one of the cooler summers of the next 80 years. Really disruptive sea level rise. I don't need to belabor this one for you all. More intense rainfall and more frequent extreme rainfall. So the storm that's gonna roll through tonight, tomorrow, and Saturday, that might have more rain than it would have 20 years ago. More intense hurricanes and higher absolute humidity levels. We're adding more moisture to the atmosphere. We're supercharging. For somebody like me who doesn't love the heat already, that combination between heat and humidity is really deadly. And it's affecting a lot of people in the overnight temperatures. So we see outdoor workers and laborers who work outside all day in these hot Carolina temperatures. But then they might go home and lack access to cooling or air conditioning, or may already be physiologically stressed. And then those overnight temperatures staying high will continue to stress them. And then things like berries and stone fruit need a certain amount of cool hours to actually develop. So our office is helping a few farmers work on what that might look like in the future for blueberries. Where might they get their chilling hours? Might they need to bring in coolers on some of these warmer winters? So we are at NC State University. We work across all 100 counties, and we work with all the institutions across North Carolina. In fact, I really like getting out of NC State sometimes and meeting new folks like you folks out here. But we're doing the original research that I talked about. We're addressing North Carolina's climate challenges. Sometimes it's a fuzzy boundary and we'll take on the Southeast, but North Carolina is always involved. We are doing extension and education. So we are the land-grant university, and this is a really good mechanism for us to get to those 100 counties. We have a staff of 10, which is pretty big for an outfit like mine, but 10 people, 100 counties in a really, really long state. So we'll work through the extension program with our agents. We'll do things like train the trainer. We'll put together fact sheets and presentations for them to take to their communities. And then in education, K-12 students, we get a lot of those coming through, and I think I just volunteered my team to come out here maybe for the spring to do some K-12 work. But when I first started in 2019, I kept getting calls from 5th grade teachers, and I saw a pattern here, wondering what is happening? Why are all these 5th grade teachers calling me? Well, it turns out that North Carolina teaches weather in 5th grade science standards, and these teachers are teaching everything, and they get to the list and say, oh no, I need to teach meteorology. So we put together a curriculum based on North Carolina that teachers can roll out, and in Carteret County, we actually passed out little tubs of weather instruments and activities that the teachers could do with the kids, really hands-on learning and curriculum attached to them. That has been hugely popular to the point where I think I actually have to hire somebody full-time to do education work and get to some of those other counties in the state, because we're really trying to broaden our reach. And then we're monitoring. We run our own weather network. I'm sorry, I'm getting over something, so my voice will go in and out. We have 44 sites across the state. The newest one is at Jockey's Ridge, so you can go out on the sand dune. When the wind blows across the sand, those temperatures will shoot up. So we had a heat index of 126.7 a few weeks ago, the warmest in our network. And I'm sure you can all tell me what day it was, because that was a hot one. And then just a few examples of the projects that we're working on. I talked about the weather kits that we have, and we're in 9 counties now, not just Carteret. Monitoring to support fire weather, so when should we be doing, thank you, prescribed burning. We work with emergency management really closely and their team of meteorologists, and then agriculture. Most of our sites are at some of the research stations. We helped Sierra Nevada leadership understand their climate risk, so I was invited to their all-hands meeting, and I told them a little bit about what they should expect in North Carolina. And they weren't just interested in the things they need to make the beer. They're interested in their staff's viability as well. What happens if it floods near their brewery and they can't get to work? Or what happens if they can't afford homes in climate-friendly spaces? And there's a big landslide, flooding, and fire risk up in western North Carolina. We're working with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians as a part of that NOAA project that was mentioned earlier. They want to plan for 7 generations. So we often talk about climate models through the end of the 21st century and kind of pretend that everything is gonna, stop after that. I certainly won't be here, but they want to ensure survivability for their people for 7 generations. So working through some vulnerability assessments with them. It's been a lot of trust building. We spent the first 2 years just kind of going up there and getting to know each other. We went around the community. We've done some surveys. We went to a stickball game. Luckily, our funder really values that type of collaboration and will pay for it. But a lot of times, grants will be like, you have 3 years, you start today, you need to produce something at the end. So really fortunate to be in that space. And then we're supporting renewable energy research in Roanoke Rapids. So working with them to think about siting solar panels in places that are ideal for those conditions, wind, a few other things as well. But I am going to talk mostly about heat because that's where we have been working. And whenever there's a weather event, it becomes the topic du jour. So I was really trained in drought, and I did a lot of work in the West, but when I got to North Carolina, it's wet, although it does get droughty here. But I've switched to heat work because it's what we're talking about. So we got 150 volunteers to come out in 2021 for that long hashtag project. We put sensors on their cars, we put sensors on their bikes, we gave them some donuts, especially the people who came out at 6 a.m. and had them drive routes around Raleigh and Durham. And what we got was the map on the right. So we did this at 3 time intervals during the day, 6, 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. And it wasn't even the hottest day. It was one of those days where we're watching the forecast, it looked like it was going to be over 90, and then there was this western wildfire smoke, which kept us a little bit cooler that day. But it was a really great learning opportunity for our volunteers that the atmosphere is entirely connected. What happens in Oregon doesn't necessarily stay in Oregon, and we saw a lot of that this summer too with bad air quality from the Canadian fires. But anyway, I'll get back to the map. We mapped Raleigh, and if you're unfamiliar with the city, I think I did the pointer wrong after being taught how to do this. Anyway, we mapped the city, and right here is downtown. Sorry, thank you. And then obviously the blue areas are cooler, they're green spaces. We've got Umstead Park.
Right here. Full screen mode.
Oh,
At the very bottom. Right there.
sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I had great instructions. This was user error. But you can see also in Raleigh, there are a number of places that are cool right next to hot places. And there's a couplet that you can't really totally see up there. But it is essentially car dealerships that ring a park. And you can see an 8-degree temperature difference over less than half a mile. But when you look at some of these neighborhoods in Raleigh, it's the poorest neighborhoods that are the hottest, that don't have trees. It's the neighborhoods that already flood or already have other issues, and messaging to these neighborhoods sometimes requires different things than we're doing. So not everybody has a cell phone, not everybody speaks English, not everybody gets the National Weather Service warnings. So we're trying to work with the city and work with the National Weather Service on targeting messaging to some of these areas, maybe working with city parks to get the word out, or the city has also been very proactive in changing the work schedules of their sanitation employees. So they go out and they collect garbage earlier on hot days. So heat is one of those things that is, heat-related illness and death is completely preventable, but it's our #1 weather-related killer. And in North Carolina, we're especially vulnerable to it because we know it's hot. You know, I got a number of emails from people after I did some interviews saying, North Carolina's hot and you just don't get it. No, it's hot, but it's getting hotter. And we're shifting beyond kind of that normal average, and even that 1, 2, 3 degrees from what it would normally be can be really taxing for some. And then as a fun citizen science project, we sent folks out with these infrared cameras, asked them to take a number of pictures. This one is, actually, it's not a citizen science project because this is my photo from a rooftop, but it's taking a picture down into a park in Raleigh, and then you can see the buildings are a little bit warmer. This isn't meant to be any sort of planning tool, but we use this a lot with students to help them think through, where would I plant trees? Where would I move that bus shelter? Oh my goodness, that area that this person stands out and waits for a bus in is actually 110 degrees, while that shaded area is 88. And that's my grad student, and she's actually taking drone maps. She's mapping with a drone the entire NC State campus, and we're gonna think about planning for the next 50 years with them. And then I just wanted to pull up, this is Durham, and it's obviously a little bit different. Durham was redlined and Raleigh was not. So back in the 30s, this was a pretty racist policy to put people of color in the worst neighborhoods, or the red ones, and other folks, white folks, in the green ones. Durham is more segregated now than it was in the 1930s, and the hot spots line up with some of the redlined areas in Durham. So we think about climate. I do a lot of weather work. I was trained in weather. It's never just climate. There's always something else on top of it. And then this was a really interesting thing that popped up. We were at a flooding meeting, And I turned to my colleague at the North Carolina Office of Resiliency and Recovery, and she said, what do you think about doing a heat protocol with Chatham County? I said, sounds great, but why don't we do more than one county since we have 100 of them? And other counties are probably gonna want this sort of thing too. And a heat protocol is for an emergency manager, a public health official, or some local government person to open up and say, we're gonna have 5 days with a heat index of 110. Who needs to be notified? Can we open cooling shelters? Where are the most vulnerable people? Can we get the schools to move their recess or their practice? And worked through the process with them, and they now have a template that they're rolling out in a pilot project, and we're gonna check in with them after the heat season's over. I think we're there, and see how it worked this summer, and then roll out the template for the entire state in May. And it's an interesting thing because emergency managers, I said we work really closely with them, we adore them. They don't think about heat as a disaster or something like a hurricane. It's not acute, it's silent, it creeps up, but they're looking to add heat into the state mitigation plan and start considering it the same way we consider flooding. So we put together this nice document, my colleague at the North Carolina Office of Resiliency and Recovery, of everything that we're doing with heat projects in North Carolina. I'm sure some are missing. It's 20 pages long, and a lot of it is just really organic. It was people coming together, like at that flooding meeting. It was a few of us just deciding that this is where we could make a lot of impact. So this photo is from the workshop that we held in Fayetteville in July with those local government officials. We held it in Fayetteville on purpose. It's the hottest part of the state. So I hosted a lot of drought meetings when I was in the West, and it would always pour. So it was like the one time that I got the climate to work out. And then we are working with the state to update the intensity, duration, and frequency curves that they use to build things. NOAA normally does this, and I don't mind being on video saying this, they are horribly out of date. So the last curves were updated for North Carolina in 2006. There are parts of the country that were updated in 1979. We are not in a climate of 1979 or 2006 anymore. It is the climate of 2023, and then going forward, it's not going to be the climate of 2023. So what we're doing is we are using downscaled climate data. We got the curves up to the historical, and then we're working with them to give them future projections. So saying Dare County, the 100-year storm or the 1% probability storm 25 years from now will be 4 more inches than it was in the past. And this is an exciting project because the state recognized a need, gave us some funding to do it. It was really collaborative, like the heat work, but also recognized that we just can't wait for the federal government sometimes to give us things. We in North Carolina, we see the problems. This was obviously I-40 after Florence, and need to do something about it. So I always tell folks that I love working here because it's a really exciting place to work on climate. The issues are known, but there's a lot of really passionate people and people invested in funding some of this work to help keep North Carolinians climate resilient. And I like to say thriving.
Is that a road? Is that a road?
Yeah, it's normally not a river. Yeah, this is I-40. So there's a few pictures with fish too. There was one point after Florence, which was 5 years.
How many inches was that?
Florence, 39 inches. There was one point after Florence, which this was, where you could not drive through the state of North Carolina from Virginia to South Carolina. You had to go around to Tennessee.
Wow.
And then we're monitoring North Carolina's environment, like I talked about. We have our own weather network, 44 stations, 16 environmental variables, 1 minute data. You do the math, that's 1.5 million observations that come into my office in Raleigh. Never a dull moment. These things are expensive and break, but they provide really crucial data that the National Weather Service uses, that the state uses. And during Hurricane Florence, which you just saw the picture of, our stations stayed up a little bit longer because they run on solar power. and not any sort of plug-in power. So the Weather Service was able to keep getting real-time data. One of the really exciting things that we have on our, what we call the EcoNet is wet bulb globe temperature. We have black globe thermometers. So we're able to measure heat stress in a way that actually relates more to how people feel heat. So the heat index, the real feel, the thing you see on your phone, that's actually the temperature in the shade. And you're not always in the shade, as we saw from that infrared camera. The black globe temperature takes into account solar radiation. It takes into account wind speed. So even on a hot day, if you start running a little bit, you'll cool down a little. Don't keep running, because then you won't. But anywhere in the black, you stay inside. Anywhere in the red, you take caution. And the High School Athletic Association has their athletic trainers come out with a smaller version of the black globe temperature. And if it's above 90, can I take questions at the end? Yeah. If it's above 90, then they will change practice, or they can't practice that day. So there's already some policy tied to this already. But we give up all of our data for free. It's publicly funded data. We want you to use it. We want you to download it. And when I took over, there was a little corral of students who would take the phone call from the father who put down the deposit for the wedding and code something up and send the data back. So we built something so we didn't have to do that anymore. We figured out that we're saving 280 person days, so funders like that sort of calculation, but more people are able to access our data. So you can go on, put in your location. I just put in NC State University. It'll tell you all the sites we have available, who owns them. You can click on the sites, pictures, how long it's been reporting, what might be missing. And then you can start making plots of your own. And sometimes I pull these up at parties, really super fun, and show folks that actually precipitation is pretty normal for the year, but it's a little bit dry. So what you're seeing on the right is from 2021. The light green is the just historical range. The black is this year, and then you've got the highest and the lowest. The highest year is usually 2018 in most of the state. That was Hurricane Florence, but also a really wet year overall. And then I took the data from Jockey's Ridge State Park for the last month, so we have our station out there. This is the black globe temperature, so anything over 90 is a super uncomfortable day, but we have all the tools that you can plot your own data. We give you a lot of it. If you ever run into a place where you can't download anymore, you can email me and I will fix that for you. We had one guy who was downloading a lot of data every day and taxing our servers, so we had to put some limits on it. But this is an exciting project because we have, we hire students who have just graduated to come be technicians. They get a chance to go out and service the station, so they get to go outside. We have some nice mountain stations, and they're going to make their fall runs to coincide with the nice foliage. But they also get trained in coding, they get trained in QC, they get trained in general climate science. A lot of them do their own research projects. It's a really nice entry-level job for folks. Some of them go on to grad school. There's not a ton of jobs like this in the climate space at this time, so it's a pretty unique thing for our office. But they sometimes run into alligators and bears. Sometimes people take a baseball bat to the solar panel. Sometimes ice will form on the station and then it falls over. It's, like I said, never a dull moment. And then we're telling the story of a different North Carolina. We have a climate blog. We rolled out this series. Well, there were a lot of posts this month. We rolled out a series on Florence after 5 years. We talked with people who worked for the Weather Service. We talked with people who were impacted by the storm. We talked about what's recovered, what hasn't. We try to digest events in a way that's understandable and readable for folks. We did an Isabel post. If we have more September hurricanes, we're gonna have a really busy September schedule, but we also do a monthly summary, what's happened in North Carolina. And a lot of our state partners will pull it down and say there's a disaster declaration or something. They're able to pull that text and work with it. And this has been pretty popular. We've I think, doubled our subscriber list. So if you want to sign up, we would love it. And then the NOAA project that Reed mentioned before, we are working in frontline Carolinas communities. So we're trying to go to the places where NOAA, the federal government, the state hasn't been before. So Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. We're working with an 8-county region in the Albemarle Pamlico Sound north of here. Elizabeth City is kind of centered on that. Greenville County, South Carolina, and Georgetown, South Carolina, which that's where the jet just crashed. So we haven't talked about that yet. But working with them to understand compound hazards, so not just drought, not just flood, not just fire, but how these things interact. We're helping them build community knowledge collaboratives, so letting communities lead. They know their communities the best. Kathie Dello from NC State University with a PhD often knows very little about a community. I'm just a scientist. And working on knowledge to action. So how do you translate this knowledge into solutions? So we're in year 3 on this, and finally, like I said, NOAA lets us work with the communities, build trust, and then we can produce some products. And then we work with decision makers. I do not tell the legislature what to do ever, but we will do things like the climate science report, which is the best available science for a policymaker. I got invited to the White House as the North Carolina representative for how campuses can be a catalyst for climate solutions. So you see it with folks here at CSI, you see it across North Carolina, that there are a lot of folks really deeply invested in taking their science and making it actionable and translatable for North Carolinians. And I slowly have faculty coming to me and saying, okay, I've studied this for 20 years, but what's the so what here? You know, how do I make this applied? And that's really fun too. So everybody's trying to think about, okay, how do we attack this problem together? And then I got to go to Congress in June and talk to them about improvements to weather data collection. And I did not do the judicial branch, and I'm hoping to not do the judicial branch, but fun year in DC. I've talked about the climate science report, but we also produced a companion risk assessment and resilience plan for the state. This is a roadmap for the state agencies to build resilience to climate change. This pairing is really powerful. The state agencies can cite this report. It was independent. It was 16 scientists who passed the information on to the governor's office, the legislature, and the state agencies. And the risk assessment has rolled into a number of things that either have turned into an executive order or some of the heat work that we're doing or some of the flooding work we're doing. So these 2 documents live on. The climate science report came out on March 11th, 2020. It's a day we all remember. It's the day the country shut down, but it came out anyway. And then at NC State, we are the land-grant university. I have to talk about the university on one slide. And we realized that there are a bunch of us doing really interesting climate change work, and we need to reach out to our colleagues at the other institutions across the state. But we've come up with this Climate Solutions Collective, another really organic thing that's spun up. My office is a part of it. We have a coastal resilience initiative, like many of the North Carolina campuses. We have a health focus and also climate adaptation science center. And I'm gonna wrap it up because I feel my throat dying, but I will take questions, conversation, ask me anything. I'll tell you if I can't answer it, but you can find our website there. Special thanks to my team. They do a lot of the work, and I get to show up at cool places and take all the credit. And there are occasionally tweets or X's or whatever it is now that come out there, but I think we're using Instagram now too. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming out before the storm, and I'm happy to hear from you.
So we can take questions. I'm just going to ask that we talk into the mic for those that are online as well. Questions?
What do you anticipate worldwide the next 25 years? Do you see us anything going back, or it's just going to be worse? Can it be reversed? What's happening?
So we're not going to go back. We're going to continue to warm, but we still can control how much we're going to warm. I like to use this analogy that we have fallen asleep on the bus, but you can still wake up and get off at the next stop. we just need to wake up and get off at the next stop. We don't want to stay on the bus till the end. The newest climate model projections aren't great. You know, we're talking a 2 to 3 degrees Celsius world, and that's kind of a conservative estimate, but climate models don't do great on extremes, and so they don't see things like 17 inches of rain in Nashville, Tennessee last year. So we're living in a different world, and we're going to continue to live in a different world. So the focus on resilience is really important, and the focus on mitigation. We have to do two hard things at the same time. We've got to draw down our fossil fuel use, and we also have to keep people safe.
The hot spots that you showed, you know, with the monitoring that you're monitoring, and I saw one that went up to the top, kind of yeah, right up there, yeah, where we are. See that black spot there? When you have those spots, what range does it cover?
Oh, it's just a station. So I'm looking out there to see if there's anything like it. It's a 10-meter tower, and it has sensors on it. So no, it doesn't cover like a huge area. And this is the problem with weather data, is that sometimes you'll have a station here, and you will have a massive storm here. And the station will say 0 inches, and the station will say 6 inches, and people will call and yell. But one of the ways we're alleviating this is working with volunteers to put rain gauges at their house, working with volunteers to put sensors at their house, and reporting some of that data back to us.
So if you extended the sensors to the people, you could get a much better picture of the whole area.
We could, but one station is $20,000 and costs $5,000 to maintain. So it's a lot of money that people don't have.
So that would, so that's personal money, not government money.
Well, it's government money, but all these stations are funded a little bit differently. So let me pick. Jockey's Ridge is at the state park, but that was NC State money. Bald Head Island Conservancy paid for that station. So if a donor comes to us and says, we have funding, we'd like to put up a station, we make sure it's in an area that needs one, make sure it's a place that we can get to. But yeah, funding is the limitation. Yeah.
Yeah, recently there's been a lot of speculation about the possibility that certain areas of the globe will become uninhabitable due to the heat. And a couple of locations that were identified as being real close were in Pakistan and also elsewhere in the Middle East. But it's been suggested that there are places in the United States where that could happen. And I noticed on Jockey's Ridge, you had a wet bulb temperature that exceeded 90 degrees a couple of times. And one temperature that has been identified as being right there at life and death is 96 degrees wet bulb. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, parts of the globe will become uninhabitable, and the regions that you mentioned are of importance for national security and moral issues. And in the US this summer, the South just baked. I would not want to be in Phoenix a lot of times, but I would not want to be in Phoenix this summer. Here we had a punctuated summer, but it was hot for those days. But there are people living in places where a fan no longer works. So yeah, it's scary. And when we think about cooling, it's also adding to the problem. So if we all crank up our air conditioners, we're not really solving that other piece of the mitigation puzzle. It's going to take an approach exactly like I had talked about before. We have to draw down our fossil fuel use, but we have to keep people safe. There are some really low-cost things that people can do to keep safe. You can truly soak your feet. This is something that we've been trying to work with some communities on. There's a study that shows that the bottom line is really impacted by heat and for companies, and by the end of the century, companies might lose 6% of their profits just because people will not be able to work in certain conditions. And when you show those numbers to people who want to make money, it's really stark. But yeah, we're not going to be able to live everywhere.
Kathie, I wonder if you could speak to the messaging of heat. You sort of touched on it. You know, it's easy to report on a hurricane. It's easy to report on these acute events. It's more challenging to, you know, provide that message of the risk associated with something that is a lot slower. And I think the analogy is sea level, right? And the risks associated with it. I think that's changed in the last 5-10 years, the messaging around sea level. And anyway, I wonder if you might touch on that.
Yeah, it has been a challenge, and this actually came up yesterday. It's a challenge to do news stories on it because the photos you get are children on a splash pad or like people at the beach. It seems like they're having a great time, and there's not a lot of, you know, pictures of like, you know, someone wilting in the heat. So that messaging challenge is tough. And like I said here, we know it's hot, and we're used to it being hot, so we might go out and do the same things that we've always done, and it's just that much hotter. So people call and yell at me about this and say it's always been hot here and it's always going to be hot here. True, but it's getting hotter. I think I think we're going to see it flip like sea level rise now that emergency management is saying this is a problem for us and we have to respond to it. I think Department of Defense has wet bulb globe temperature now as their metric, and they're socializing it a lot, and they actually spend a lot of money on resilience because of those things like national security issues. But yeah, it is a challenge, but there have been a few times this summer. Raleigh had a heat index of 114. It was our hottest on record. And we could point to people and say, remember that day you didn't go outside? It was really hot, and it was 79 degrees overnight, and the National Weather Service put out a nighttime heat advisory, which they've never done before. It's tough. Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna.
Is there a place one could go to find out some combination of, let's say, looking 10 years out, what does the hurricane frequency look like? And what does the flood map look like?
I'll take the flood
combination
map,
of
and then
those
I'll
two.
toss the hurricane frequency over. The flood maps are also out of date, and the 100-year flood that FEMA has mapped is woefully inaccurate, and they know this. So 28% of the claims in the US for flooding happen outside of the mapped floodplains, so that's how bad they are. And adding projections into it, the floodplain gets even bigger, but that's a literal act of Congress. On hurricane frequency,
I'm not a climatologist, but I did sleep in a. Yeah, the short answer is I don't think there is a prediction for what that looks like 10 years out. The longer answer is, you know, a lot of it depends on that connection between atmosphere and ocean, sort of like what we're seeing the last couple days. The prediction is that you will see increased number, increased extremity. Exactly what that looks like 10 years from now, I don't know that you can put your finger on it. That's a typical scientist non-answer. Welcome.
it's hard to see hurricanes in the climate models. They're really coarse in resolution. It's mostly just a change in the state, and sometimes they'll spin up. We had a grad student pull out the extreme precip data from some of the downscale climate models. He had 59 inches in one day, and we're like, okay, the model's trying to create a tropical system. Is 59 inches possible, plausible? These are a lot of questions that forecasters are now having to ask of themselves when they see in the weather model, oh no, 12 inches of rain, that's never happened before, and then it happens.
The change happened faster than we thought it would 5 years ago?
5 years ago, I think the change is happening faster than we thought it would. But I'm trying to think about 5 years ago. Yeah, I mean, that was Florence. Florence was a really defining event for North Carolina.
I'm wondering if there's been any work on experimentation with systems for mitigating heat in heat envelopes or in the cities. For example, using lighter pavement colors, using lighter roof colors, et cetera. Are you guys doing any research on that?
Yeah, Raleigh, City of Raleigh is putting titanium dioxide on some of their streets and some of the heat islands to reflect the heat. It's one of those things where you're adding a substance to another substance to do something else, and that can be controversial, but it seems to be working. They're looking at some stormwater infrastructure that is green, that will trap the rainfall, but also cool the area. Lighter roofs, green roofs, I would say a lot of that work is happening.
When I see picture on the internet, like of Europe, I've seen them turn urban areas into green areas. Is that part of the goal of the state to green up things a little bit more?
I don't know what the state's plans are, but North Carolina is growing so rapidly in population that we are turning more green areas into non-green areas.
It's happened here at the beach. I remember when I came 30 years ago, you would go down the bypass and there would be green everywhere. And now their whole sections were totally gone. And that has to affect the envelope. It has to affect the absorption of everything. You know, it's just, can there be a requirement? Have you seen anyone move legislatively for a requirement that when you build stuff to add the green component to it and maintain it as part of an expensive building?
I've not seen it in North Carolina. Trees, though, have other issues associated with them. So if you've spent any time in the Triangle in March, it is yellow because of all the pollen, so there is a public health angle to it. If you add a bunch of trees to an area, you also increase the evapotranspiration and can change the local climate. None of our solutions are just a silver bullet. It's a lot of many things. Yeah.
I work at the community care clinic here locally, and last year one of our nurse practitioners worked with AmeriCares and the Harvard School of Public Health to develop a toolkit for community care practices to talk to patients about the impact of climate change and how the uninsured and the underinsured patients could deal with that. In my opinion, it stopped too early because while a one-on-one conversation with the patient definitely helps, we need to be talking to the employers like painters, landscaping companies that have their employees out in the working in the heat of the day and what can be done. So is there any opportunity to take a project like that further?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are doing some of that in the Albemarle region. Yeah, so I'm familiar with that Harvard work, and we're trying to work through trusted messengers. So, you know, I can walk into a room and be like, hi, I'm the state climatologist, and people will be like, who are you? What does that get you? But you trust your doctor, your pharmacist, your teacher, your librarian, your family. Actually, one of the best things you can do for climate change is just talk about it. One of the things that we're trying to work on is with pharmacists, just a little magnet or pamphlet that goes with your medicine. Maybe your SSRI will make you woozy if it's above a certain temperature. Working with librarians to do some of that as well. So yeah, there's plenty of room to take that further, and I think it's really effective too, because it gets past, hi, you need to know a scientist, and hi, here's this person you trust to give you this medicine, and they're gonna talk to you about it as well.
The extension centers work with you?
Yes. Yeah, we love the Extension Service. They are the trusted people in their communities, and they bring interesting questions to us and challenges to us. People will say, the one that sticks out to me is that 2018, we had a really wet year, we had Hurricane Florence, and then we dried out really rapidly in 2019. So we swung right to a drought, and they had a lot of sweet potato farmers who missed that window to plant from too wet to too dry. George.
So with a changing climate and obviously a need for additional research, are you seeing more students interested in studying in this area, and how is that changing the curriculum?
So many more students. All jobs are climate jobs, so climate's going to affect everything, but the number of applications we get, we can't handle. One of the really fun things that's happened recently is I've teamed up with a faculty member in Marine Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. She's a straight physical scientist, and I'm the applied one, and we co-mentor graduate students so that they get some real-world experience, so they'll work on the NCDOT rainfall project. But we also see it beyond atmospheric sciences or the physical sciences. We're seeing it in policy and economics, sociology. Yeah, I would say the youth are extremely terrified. There's a lot of climate anxiety, but they're very motivated to do something about it. And there are times where I look at them and wish I had been like them when I was younger, because they're speaking truth to power.
Kathie, I wonder if you could speak to the connection. It is a state climate office, and I'm curious sort of what that means in the way of potentially influencing policy, where that connection is made. I mean, some of the things that you've talked about, the intensity of rain, right? How we develop permits that are given are driven by infiltration. And so if intensity of rain is changing, then do we need to think about how we permit things for infiltration? That doesn't get done unless there's some connection. I'm curious how that happens, maybe with or without your office.
Yeah, that's a good question. So my boss is not the governor. I am in the College of Sciences at NC State University, but work really closely with the folks in the governor's office and have contracts with 5 state agencies to do this kind of work with them. A lot of it has just been relationship building. A lot of it has been expressed need, like the precip frequency curves, and they'll come find us. I would say the heat work is the closest thing to seeing something rapidly get adopted into policy. We try to walk a pretty careful line in terms of, here's the data, here's the science, and we're not going to tell you what decisions to make off of it. North Carolina is a 50-50 state, and we're not just working with 50% of the population. So, yeah, it's sometimes a safer place to be, but we're also really closely tied with the Office of Resiliency and Recovery, which started after Hurricane Florence and is now permanent. And they are the policy people, and we're the science people, and there is a Venn diagram where we overlap, and I think I just saw a text message come in from one of them. But we have this really nice handoff. They can point to us and say, they gave us the science, they're the experts, and we can point to them and say, go talk to them about what you should do. But I would say even the DOT project, though, they are really committed to getting these curves, working with their engineers to actually put it into design. They're thinking about which roads they should prioritize. They can't do all of them because of funding. So which routes do they need for evacuations or getting people to hospitals? We do sit through some of that with them.
Do you have the insurance companies fund anything? Since they seem to raise the rates quite high.
They do not fund us. They can if they're online. I will take your money. We are a partially soft money institute. We do get a state appropriation, but to keep 10 people employed, I have to go out and get other money too. No, we don't work with the insurance companies directly, but I mean, they're obviously in the game. California is just canceling policies left and right because of wildfire risk.
So my point being, would they be a mechanism contribute to change since it's affecting them and their client base.
They are, and they know. I'm sorry, insurance agencies. The reinsurance industry especially is committed, the European ones. I mean, like I said, with the companies who realize that they're going to lose 6% of their profit by the end of the century because they can't have people work in extreme heat, they see it, they know it.
Speaking to what you had asked, one issue that's local, I think, is when there's a summer with heavy rainfall, the bacteria from failing septic fields drains into the sound, and it's causing illness and death, I believe. Yeah, so like, how would you advise, and who would you advise, and what steps would be taken to improve that situation as an example?
My colleagues at Sea Grant did a project on that in Nag's Head, and it's shocking. I will say that it's probably the science that might get zoning policy changed because it is such a public health risk. There's a lot of on-site treatment that has been proposed, and I think some of the colleagues at ECU are working on that as well. But there are also places in North Carolina that do not have septic tanks. They have ditches, some of the poorest counties. And I won't say which county it is, but we've been told that the land is the only thing of value that these people own. And if the government comes in and says, you don't have a septic system, your land plummets. So there's a lot of looking the other way. I would say this is, when I first heard about this 4 years ago, I'm like, oh, it's not a problem, we can fix it. No, it's a problem, and it's getting worse. So I would say that's one of those things, whenever you can make a connection to health, people, kids, jobs, that's kind of the most effective communication mechanism. But yeah, it's not good.
Kathie, we want to thank you for taking the time, answering a lot of questions. So appreciate the time.
Yeah, it was great to come out here.
Thank you all for coming. We hope to see you next month.